7 minutes. That's how long it took for a missile Iran had been hiding for weeks to shatter every assumption about who was winning this war. The Sejjil, 2-stage, solid fuel, anti-radar coating, range 2,000 kilometers. And it just punched through the most expensive air defense system ever built. But here's what nobody's saying out loud yet. On the same day Iran pulled this weapon off the shelf, the President of the United States did something no American leader has had to do in decades. He asked China for help, and China said no. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and if you think that combination of events is a coincidence, you haven't been paying attention to how modern wars are actually won. Let me explain why the Sejjil changes everything, and why the silence from Beijing might matter more than the missile itself. Most of Iran's arsenal runs on liquid fuel. That sounds technical, but it's actually a massive vulnerability. Liquid fuel missiles need preparation time, fuel trucks roll up, propellant gets loaded, systems pressurize. That entire process takes hours, and every second of it is visible to American surveillance satellites orbiting overhead. Detection windows mean those missiles can be destroyed before they ever leave the ground. The Sejjil eliminates that window completely. Solid fuel means it sits in storage fully armed, ready to fire in minutes instead of hours. No fueling sequence, no visible preparation, no warning. The satellite advantage that American defense doctrine depends on functionally disappears. Now add the second layer, anti-radar coating. The Sejjil's surface materials are designed to shrink its radar signature, making it significantly harder for tracking systems to lock on during flight. Some analysts call it Iran's dancing missile because intelligence reports suggest it can maneuver mid-flight, altering its trajectory to complicate interception algorithms. Combine launch speed, reduced radar visibility, and potential course changes, and you have a weapon specifically engineered to defeat every advantage missile defense systems rely on: detection time, tracking reliability, predictable flight paths. It carries a 700-kilogram warhead, enough to flatten hardened military infrastructure. Iranian officials say it's suitable for a range of warhead configurations, language that keeps every defense planner awake at night wondering what configurations they're actually referring to. But here's the question that should disturb you more than the missile's specifications. Why did Iran wait? The Sejjil wasn't unavailable on day one. Development started in the 1990s, first test in 2008. Operational deployment confirmed years ago. Iran could have used this weapon in the opening salvos of this conflict. Instead, it absorbed weeks of American and Israeli airstrikes, watched its infrastructure get degraded, took damage to naval assets, air defense networks, launch sites, let the narrative consolidate around the idea that Iran's offensive capability was collapsing. And then, precisely when analysts were writing assessments about diminished Iranian capacity, Tehran introduced a missile designed to be harder to detect and harder to stop than anything it had used before. That's not desperation, that's strategic patience, holding a capability in reserve for maximum psychological and operational impact. And if Iran was holding the Sejjil back this whole time, what else is still on the shelf? Reports mention a Sejjil 3 variant with a potential 4,000-kilometer range, though that remains unconfirmed. The uncertainty itself is a weapon. But let me be more specific about what concerns me. Iran's defense doctrine operates on a concept called escalation dominance, the ability to control the pace and intensity of conflict by revealing capabilities in stages. First, liquid fuel missiles that showed range but vulnerability. Then, drone swarms that tested defense saturation points. Now, solid fuel missiles that compress reaction windows. Each reveal forces the other side to recalculate, to wonder what comes next, to question whether their current defensive posture is adequate. This isn't random. This is a deliberately sequenced demonstration designed to keep adversaries uncertain about the full scope of Iranian capability. And uncertainty, in modern warfare, is more valuable than superiority, because when your opponent doesn't know what you have left, they cannot confidently commit to decisive action. Now here's where this story stops being about missiles and starts being about power. On the exact same day Iran deployed the Sejjil, President Trump went to the international community and made a request. He asked China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom to send warships to help manage disruptions at the Strait of Hormuz. He claimed there was positive response. He warned NATO allies they faced a very bad future if they didn't step up. And here's what actually happened. Not one country on that list committed warships. Not a single vessel. Zero coalition. Let that settle in for a moment. The United States operates the most powerful naval force in human history. Carrier strike groups deployed. Global force projection. And the sitting president publicly asked China, a geopolitical rival, to help keep a 21-mile-wide shipping lane open. Why would Beijing say yes? Chinese tankers are moving through Hormuz with minimal disruption. China buys massive quantities of oil from Iran. Joining an American-led military operation would jeopardize that supply and antagonize a key energy partner. Strategically, the disruption benefits China's relative position. Why solve a problem that's working in your favor? But there's a deeper calculation happening here that most analysts are missing. Every dollar the United States spends managing this crisis is a dollar not spent countering China in the Pacific. Every carrier strike group tied down in the Persian Gulf is one less asset available for Taiwan contingency planning. Every interceptor fired at Iranian drones is one that cannot sit in a magazine aboard a destroyer near the South China Sea. Beijing isn't just declining to help. Beijing is watching the United States burn through strategic reserves, diplomatic capital, and military readiness in a theater that matters far more to Washington than it does to China. The request itself revealed weakness, and China's silence is the response. This is what strategic patience looks like when your adversary asks you to solve their problem for them. France lost a soldier in Iraq and isn't looking to escalate. Japan was asked directly and declined. South Korea redeployed missile defense assets away from the Korean Peninsula to the Middle East and is now managing the security gap that created. The United Kingdom maintains a defensive posture and publicly opposes regime change strategies. The coalition Trump described as forming has not formed. The countries whose economies depend most on Hormuz staying open aren't sending warships. They're pursuing quiet diplomatic channels with Tehran instead, channels that don't include Washington. Meanwhile, the economic damage is no longer theoretical. Oil hit its highest price since July 2022. EU energy ministers convened emergency sessions to discuss surging costs. In the United States, gas prices are climbing, jet fuel costs are raising airfares, freight costs are pushing up the price of everything that moves by truck, which is effectively everything. Your grocery bill, delivery fees, the number at the pump, it all traces back to a disrupted strait and a conflict that hasn't ended on the timeline initially projected. And here's what makes this particularly devastating. The economic pain is asymmetric. American consumers are absorbing costs that translate to inconvenience and inflation. For countries whose economies run on thin energy margins, this is existential. Pakistan faces rolling blackouts because LNG shipments are rerouted or delayed. Bangladesh's textile industry, which employs 4 million people, is cutting production shifts because diesel costs have doubled. Sri Lanka, still recovering from its 2022 economic collapse, is rationing fuel again. These aren't theoretical scenarios. These are documented disruptions happening right now, and every additional week the strait remains partially closed pushes more countries toward the edge. The global economy is not a series of isolated markets. It's an interconnected system, and the Strait of Hormuz is a load-bearing artery. When that artery constricts, the damage spreads in directions most people never anticipated. The war's geographic footprint isn't shrinking, it's expanding. Israeli ground operations in southern Lebanon, airstrikes on Beirut, explosions across Tehran. A missile strike killed someone in Abu Dhabi, a country that isn't even a direct combatant. A fuel tanker near Dubai International Airport caught fire after what's reported as an Iranian drone strike. Map that geography. Tehran, Beirut, southern Lebanon, Israel, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. That's not a two-party war. That's a regional conflict touching 6 countries, and each new location adds diplomatic complexity and increases the probability of catastrophic miscalculation. So here's where every thread converges. Iran introduced its most survivable ballistic missile at a moment of maximum strategic effect. The Strait of Hormuz remains disrupted. The international coalition needed to secure it does not exist. Oil is at multi-year highs. European ministers are in crisis mode. American consumers are paying more for everything. Trump told the world help was coming. The data says otherwise. No warships, no coalition, no ceasefire framework. Iran says there will be no ceasefire under current conditions. Israel's defense establishment signals no operational time limit. And the United States is publicly requesting assistance from countries unwilling or unable to provide it. The Sejjil didn't just strike a target, it struck a narrative. The narrative that Iran's capability was spent, that the conflict had a short timeline, that the other side had already won. A solid fuel missile with anti-radar coating and a 7-minute flight time just penetrated one of the most sophisticated air defense systems on the planet. And the president who launched this campaign is now asking rivals for naval support he cannot secure. That's not the profile of a war that's ending. That's the profile of a war entering its next phase. And let me be explicit about what that next phase looks like, because I've studied enough conflicts to recognize the pattern. When a regional power demonstrates escalation control while a global power struggles to form coalitions, the regional power dictates tempo. When oil-dependent economies start rationing fuel while the disrupting nation maintains export revenue through alternative channels, leverage shifts. When military assets designed for peer conflict get consumed in extended regional operations, readiness gaps emerge in other theaters. This is not speculation. This is observable force depletion, diplomatic isolation, and economic hemorrhaging happening in real time. The variables are public. The trajectory is predictable. And the outcome depends entirely on whether countries with leverage decide to use it, or whether they keep watching from the sidelines while the strait stays closed, missiles keep flying, and costs keep climbing for everyone. This is what escalation management looks like when the side you thought was losing reveals it was holding cards you didn't know existed. And here's what should concern you most. We still don't know how many cards remain in the deck. Iran demonstrated solid fuel capability. It proved penetration against layered defense. It forced an American president to publicly request help that didn't materialize. 3 strategic victories in 1 deployment. That's not luck. That's planning. And if you think the Sejjil represents the ceiling of Iranian capability, rather than the floor, you haven't been paying attention to how this conflict has unfolded from the beginning. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and I'll see you when the next card gets played.